how does the APS course help people apply Scrum effectively? Well, it kind of helps in a number of ways. So because it's a practical class, they get experience during the class understanding what is Scrum, why it works, and how it would work for them, right? So the people that are participating in the class, by the end of, let's say, the second half day, have a firm grasp of Scrum. There's still 2 more sprints after that. One's how would you describe it? Like a dysfunctional people attributes discovery session, and then the one after that's a kind of scaling session. If we get to that, don't always get to that. But the last part of the class that we do after we've done all of those things is we've kind of got two main exercises. One is a choice, and the other one's I kind of always do. The choice one is this a group of people who have been doing Scrum already? And if they've been doing Scrum already, then we do like a Scrum tune-up exercise where they're effectively doing a diffing exercise between the Scrum they just learned and the Scrum they're doing in their organization. So they do a kind of diffing exercise, kind of what's different, how they feel about those changes, get that information down. We have a little exercise around that. The other option for that one is if they've not been doing Scrum, then we have a Scrum startup exercise. And in the Scrum startup exercise, they're who's going to be your product owner, who's going to be your Scrum master, where are you going to store your backlog, how are you going to manage it, just to get them started in thinking about how that's going to work in their organization. So those 2 things alone, it's one or the other, I don't do both, is really good. But then one of the last exercises that I do with groups is creating a organizational change backlog. Because the people that know most about how organizations need to be different in doing Agile are the people that are actually doing the work, that are struggling within the bounds of the processes that the organization's created. So by asking them to create that organizational change backlog or add things to the organizational change backlog, they're thinking about all the things that affect them. Whereas when leadership adds things to the organizational change backlog, they're probably thinking about things that affect them, right? And they're proxying the things that affect other people, what they think is going to be a problem for other people. But when you get the people that have just gone through this Scrum class and they realize what needs to be different, they start adding all sorts of things to the class. And sometimes it's, they'll add, we need more people trained in this so that more people understand what it is we're talking about. That's always good for me, right? But most of the time they're adding things like, well, we've got this policy in the organization, this needs to change, or leadership's not engaged enough in the story that we're trying to create, this needs to change. And it's very enlightening for leadership if they're attending. And I do recommend that. The time when I've seen the APS be most effective, I did a class for a number of classes for a company in the US called Backcountry. They're a clothing, apparel, ski type place in Utah. And we trained everybody in the company from the CEO all the way down to the guy who drives the forklift in the warehouse. It was fantastic. And what was really interesting was the guy that drives the forklift in the warehouse. At the end of the first half day, we did 2 full days for the class, but at the end of the first half day, he went to his boss and said, why the hell am I here? I don't want to be here. What is this crap you're having me learn? I don't see why it's valuable for me. Can I just go back to driving my forklift in the warehouse? But by the end of that day, he was the one standing at the board, engaging with the team, asking them questions. Do we have this? Do we have that? How would this work? Because he started to realize how the work that these engineers were doing that he didn't have any connection with before, he started to understand how the work that they were doing affected his world. Because he's driving the forklift in the warehouse. He's got an iPad attached to the forklift that's telling him where all the stuff is in the warehouse and what needs to go in the truck and what order he needs to get things out and pack it and all of those kind of things. And they're the ones that are writing that software. And he happened to have people at his table, because we just self-select into teams, that were responsible for some of the things that directly affected him. So he understood why it was important that he be part of that process, why he needed to engage in that process. And it brought another dimension. He's the customer was in the class, right, inside of this company. But even the view that the people in the room had of the CEOs sitting there and the CEOs participating in the class and actually focusing for 2 full days on the class because he saw how important it was to that discussion. And then when you're having that discussion at the end, the organizational change backlog, what needs to change, who's in the room that can deal with it? The CEO is sitting right there and can, here's the organizational change backlog. This is yours now. You need to do something with it. And that whole thing really helps. Now, that's different in a public class, right? You're not going to get everybody in a company in the public class, but you get quite a lot of the things that I've talked about there all the way to that point. There's maybe not the epiphany moment at the end when you're creating the organizational change backlog for the organization as a whole, but it's still a great experience.